Whoa. Here we go, baby. God, crush it though.
Hey guys, Tyler Berger here with Bass Fishing HQ, and today I want to talk about one of the best lures to use during that late fall time frame, and that is the spinnerbait. And not only that, I'm going to give you 4 big tips that are going to help you to catch more fish on a spinnerbait during the late fall, so stay tuned. It's going to be a good one. So like I said, guys, a spinnerbait is one of the best lures to use during the fall. As we know, a lot of bass, whether you're fishing for smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, spotted bass, they're all feeding up pretty heavily this time of the year, kind of preparing to go into winter. And especially if you live kind of in those mid to northern states, you really have a fall feed that tends to happen where these fish are going to be feeding a lot on bait fish. Now, whether you have shad in your lakes, or maybe you're fishing way up north where the fish are feeding on alewives or even bluegill, whatever it may be, guys, a spinnerbait can be a really, really good bait to use. You can cover a lot of water, you can fish it efficiently, and the thing about it is it catches some really big bass during the fall. And the other thing about a spinnerbait is it can work in pretty cold water. I've caught a lot of spinnerbait fish in the fall and even in the spring in that water temperature that's in the upper 40s. So right now I'm on the water today and the water is like 54 degrees and it's perfect. So the first tip that I want to give you guys really revolves around location, and location is really key when you're fishing a spinnerbait. There's a lot of lakes out there in the country that are kind of set up similar to the one that I'm fishing today. On the lower end of this body of water, you have pretty clean water where you have 4, 5, 6 foot of visibility. But on the upper end of this lake, where I am right now, you actually have lower visibility. It's only about a foot, maybe 2 foot at most, but a lot of the water that I'm seeing is about a foot visibility. The water isn't necessarily muddy, but it's just got that heavy stain to it. And this is the first tip, is that finding that stained water can really be key to catching bass during the fall on a spinnerbait. And it's not that you won't catch fish on a spinnerbait in clear water, it's just that I think that sometimes other lures like a jerkbait actually might work better than the spinnerbait. So what I really like to find is that off-color water. That off-color water just tends to keep those bass a little bit shallower, and that might keep them in that, 1 foot to 3 foot range where a spinnerbait is really just going to dominate. Now, along with finding that off-color water, another thing that you need to find is bait fish. In the lake that I'm fishing here, it's gizzard shad. That's what I'm looking for. And here's the thing, I actually did a video about this whole subject kind of, but in the fall, you tend to have bait fish almost everywhere. It can be deep, it can be shallow, it can be really everywhere. So something that I really like to do is find the bigger bait fish. If you can find those bigger threadfin shad or bigger gizzard shad, whatever it may be, maybe it's bluegill on your lake, those bigger bait fish tend to be where you find the quality fish. I got into this creek arm here and immediately I could see the bigger bait fish just from my electronics. And once I stood up on the front deck of the boat, they were coming up, they were pecking on the top of the surface, and you could tell they were the bigger ones, those 4 5 inch shad, as opposed to the really little 1 or 2 inch shad that are kind of everywhere. Tip number 2 when it comes to that fall time spinnerbait fishing is that I tend to catch a lot of bass around wood laydowns during this time of the year, or wood in general, whether that's laydowns, maybe it's stumps or standing timber. It just seems that the bass really relate to that wood kind of in that later fall, like I'm talking about when that water's in the 50s, high 40s. Now, I'm not saying you're not gonna catch spinnerbait on rocks or around grass if it's still left, but what I'm saying is I like to focus on wood a lot of times. And with that being said, the tip when it actually comes to fishing around that wood is, instead of making longer casts, sometimes I think it is actually better to get really up tight to the wood itself and actually make a lot of small pitches to the wood. Come on, fish. Oh, that fish got wrapped around. I mean, that's the bad thing about fishing in all this wood like that is, you're gonna get some fish caught up in the brush from time to time. That fish wasn't huge. I thought I could just pull him around, but he obviously had other plans. One thing that I love to do with the spinnerbait is pitch it, like a jig. I try to get that
that bait into areas that other guys aren't getting it, you know. And if I'm sitting out here over here, I can't really cast in behind this stuff. So getting up tight like you would if you were flipping a jig or a crawl of some sort, you can do the same thing, but you can throw a spinnerbait instead. And that's exactly what I just did over here where I had that fish just come off. But it's just something that a lot of guys don't always think about. I mean, there's no reason you can't pitch a spinnerbait or a moving bait like a vibrating jig or even a square bill. You can pitch a square bill around the same type of stuff. So
this is almost the same as if you were flipping a jig or a soft plastic. The thing is I'm trying to get my spinnerbait right up next to the wood. I'm trying to hit all different types of angles in the wood, every little high percentage area in that wood that I see. I'm trying to hit it with my spinnerbait. So sometimes getting really close up to the cover and actually making pitches with your spinnerbait can actually help you to get more bites because you're going to be hitting more high percentage areas. Now, with that being said, you have to be stealthy when it comes to this. You don't want to be running up like into the wood or kicking your trolling motor and blowing out the water. You want to be stealthy when you're really close to an object where a bass could potentially be.
oh my gosh, the same thing just happened again.
So the third tip is really about making multiple casts at those high percentage areas. I have seen this so many times, actually throughout the entire year. It's not just in the fall, but it definitely seems to hold true in the fall. If you get around, you know, a stump, you know, and I'm not saying you have to do this on every little twig that you see, but what I am saying is as a fisherman, we all get to those little areas or we find those laydowns where you're just like, oh my gosh, there's a bass in there. There's absolutely a bass in there. In your mind, you're like, there's no way there's not a bass in there. And when you find those particular areas, like a really good laydown, as you can see right here behind me, if you have those areas, make multiple casts, even to the exact same spot. If you see, you know, where that limb comes down to the water, it kind of makes a V. A lot of times that's a high percentage area. Make 3-4 casts in there, maybe even more if you really like. There's no doubt there's a bass in there.
There he is. Daggone. There we go.
You know, the perfect analogy is when you're at home watching football and your little brother or your cousin or your son keeps running in front of the TV screen, constantly screaming his head off, and you're trying to watch the football game, right? Well, by about the 9th, 10th time, you're probably eventually going to say something. You're going to reach out, you're going to grab him and say, look, I'm trying to watch the game here, son. Can you go in the other room, okay? The same thing happens with a bass, right? But a bass can't reach out with its fin, but if you keep throwing that spinnerbait up in its face, you're constantly up in its face, eventually it just got to reach out and bite that bait and you're going to catch that fish. So making multiple casts at the same target can be key to catch bass on a spinnerbait during the fall. So the fourth tip actually comes down to the spinnerbait itself. And if you guys are like me, I like a high quality spinnerbait. But the thing is that spinnerbaits can be pricey. I mean, sometimes you're paying $10, $11, $12, $13. You could pay a lot for a spinnerbait. And so what I like to do is actually make my own spinnerbaits. The thing is if you do it the way that I do it, it's very easy. It's very simple. I can make a spinnerbait in no time. And the other thing is I can make a spinnerbait for the exact location, water temperature, water color, everything on that day that I'm out there fishing. And the other thing is you actually save a lot of money. This particular spinnerbait here, I think I have like $4 in, and it's a very high quality spinnerbait. So what I do is I literally just carry around a bag that is full of spinnerbait parts. And I'm actually gonna show you guys real quick how I go about building a spinnerbait on the water. All right, guys, here is literally what I keep with me. It's my spinnerbait bag. I have a bunch of these boss heads like the ones that I have here. And you know, there's some 3/8 ounce ones, there's some 1/2 ounce ones. I have some that are more compact. So it's really quite simple. I'm just gonna pick out a head that I wanna use. I'm gonna make kind of a muddy water spinnerbait right now. So I'm gonna take this chartreuse head. This is a 3/8 ounce chartreuse head. I have a bunch of skirt material with me. This bait here is gonna be straight chartreuse as well. So I'm gonna pull out that skirt. I also have a bunch of blades in here. On this particular spinnerbait, I'm gonna put a gold willow leaf blade on there. And I'm also going to put a gold Colorado blade, a little bit smaller one on there. That's gonna be my spinnerbait setup. So there's most of the components that I need. I'm also gonna need beads, swivels, and clevis. There we go. First thing I'm gonna do is put this Colorado blade on. So basically I put the clevis through my Colorado blade, put it on my spinnerbait shaft just like that. I want this cupped in to be facing towards the wire just like that. The next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put 4 or 5 beads on the wire. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, there is the start of the spinnerbait. I'm gonna lay that down. Next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take out one of these spinnerbait swivels and I'm going to attach my willow leaf blade to it. All right, now we got the swivel on there. I'm gonna put that down for a minute. Grab a pair of pliers and I'm just gonna roll the wire at the top around my pliers, kind of making a small loop, if you can see that right there. I'm gonna go ahead and put my blade on and then I'm just gonna kind of crimp that loop tight. After that, I'm simply gonna take my skirt and feed it up on the spinnerbait. And there we go, guys. A great muddy water spinnerbait. Now I kind of made this spinnerbait pretty fast, but if you guys want to watch me actually build another one of these spinnerbaits a lot slower, I actually did this during the springtime this year. I'm gonna leave a link for that video right there. You guys can click on that video and watch me build another spinnerbait. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a comment, give it a like. I'll see you guys in the next video.